shall start the meeting. I think I kind of wanted to talk about do a little mini debrief, see if there's any lingering thoughts from the special meeting on Wednesday. It's live as of right now, and so I wanted to kind of pass the mic and see how that integration went. And if there are any updates that Rick wants to share, that's kind of what the vague updates means in my head. And then if we wanted to talk about a working plan, what are our next steps now that we've crossed a couple things off? And then if there's any homework. So I'm hoping we can roughly stay on task as much as possible. If I know Lori has to leave at 5, you guys scoot at 5:30 anyways, and that's a beautiful Friday, and we kind of
I'd be thrilled to be finished early.
Yeah, so if I'm talking quickly, so
Aye.
yes.
Seconded.
Great.
All in favor? We're done.
Awesome. All right, so I thought personally that council meeting was really well. It was open discussion. I thought we heard some feedback and answered a lot of questions, but I don't know how it felt for others, or also when I gave you guys a chance to speak, but also I'm open ears to those that were just active citizen participants. So
There was a gentleman behind me, a couple of seats. Okay.
John.
And I regretted, I felt like maybe we weren't clear, and that there are more steps after this, that the brunt of the plan, the first 3 items was really, clean up and clarity, but that we were going to be tackling some other budgetary issues. And I hope that came across.
Well, I had a conversation with John after, and I think, I kind of got that across to him too, that, we aren't done, we're far from done. This is just,
This system wasn't designed to fix anything. It was, to clean up and get things ready so more work can be done.
Right.
yeah, and thanks for always trying to do better.
I'll just say that I'm still dealing with people who think that we've changed systems, like wholesale, like something completely new. And I keep saying, there is nothing different. When they turn on the computers, as far as we know, what Chip said is that the only difference would be how they log in and how they print. And then we can start looking at what's in the system that we haven't possibly been trained for, or when you're in a system all day long, you probably don't have time to look for new things, or if you were trained a certain way. So it's.
So what I'm hearing is there's still some misunderstandings out there, and I wonder if there's an opportunity that once we have moved forward a little bit more, that we could have either a special a round table or something like that with the public. Maybe it's NEK-TV, maybe it's a Sunday, kind of like the water and sewer did, which is kind of like not a Q&A, maybe a Q&A. I'm not quite sure, but I think there's an opportunity that we could still, because we are still, the place that we're at right now, it's not that we have answers or that we've had a hard look at things or had time with NEMRIC to really understand the software, but I think, there's opportunity.
So as of 9:30, 10 o'clock this morning, we're on the cloud now.
Yeah.
Everything went well. We had a couple of glitches with the cash receipts printer
Okay.
and one with printing up in Tom's office, but Dennis got those straightened out.
Awesome. Thank you, Dennis.
Adam started working on this at 4:30 last night, and he was back on with us at 8 o'clock this morning. Everybody's got passwords and signed in.
Wow.
Awesome.
Woohoo.
You're right. The only difference is just signing into NEMRIC and 2 or 3 passwords. Or different passwords you got to put in. And everything else is the same.
Okay.
And even the cash receipts problem was one that we were actually already having. And they had misdiagnosed the problem, according to Dennis, and going online pushed Dennis to figure out what the actual problem was, and it's now been fixed. And that's been plaguing us for about 6 months.
Wow.
So,
I think something in there didn't line up with Windows 11 or whatever it is.
right, but it's now, according to Dennis, he feels like we've got that part taken care of too. So, yeah, in less than 24 hours, we made the switch over. I signed those documents and sent them off yesterday morning at about 8 o'clock, and by this morning at 9 o'clock, we were ready to roll.
I'll just say, Carter, I think that just in hearing what you're saying, and kind of knowing the players that continue to ask these questions, my personal feeling is that I just continue to say it's the same program. And as we move forward, just like you just said, as we move forward, we will find things that we've not been, so I don't know that we need to
I hear you.
like address it in some major way. I think it will come out as we move forward.
Well, the old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I'm the old, right? But I was relieved to see that everything's the same, except for getting into the system, everything's exactly the way it was.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear. So the Friday, half day went as usual-ish.
Yeah,
as
after about
Fiona?
10 o'clock, we were just
Great.
cruising along.
Yeah.
I think Stacy's got some other administrative stuff to do on there.
Good.
She and Robin are sharing that duty in case one of them's out.
I'm glad. Good.
That was the best thing that Chip said last Friday. There are two cities in front of you, but
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we just did this in 24 hours is kind of amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was like, oh, he's gonna complete. Yeah.
we don't have to wait till July or something.
So what's the plan on engaging Chip? Do we have a list of initial items to get started with for next
So I
week?
signed that contract yesterday as well, and we agreed that hopefully by today, we would be up and running. And I think his plan is to reach out on Monday and figure out what the first steps are that we want to work on. But actually, to be clear, I actually think he understands the first step, which is now that he has access to current information, I think his intention is to just go through and take a look, like he did that very quick half hour before we met with him last week, and see if there are things that he wants to highlight for us that we should be paying attention to.
Survey the system.
Exactly.
And then come back, and will he be working with you, with Jim? I mean, what's, the both of you, what's kind of the plan there?
Honestly, I haven't gotten that far yet. I don't know.
Fair enough.
But I think I heard him offering last week to meet with us for these meetings. So I think, if we're scheduling the next meeting for next Friday, I think we invite him to come be a part of that meeting, and we start working cooperatively between him and this team. And then, I figured Jim and Stacy and Robin's role is basically to, with whatever support they need that we can provide, figure out how to actually implement whatever it is that we're discussing.
I think it would be helpful if he could get us that chart of accounts. Because we're not on the system, but it might help us. We hear, that we're not using this or we're not using that, but we're not seeing it. And I'm just wondering if it would help us, as we move forward, to actually see the chart of accounts.
We should be able
to
to
see
print the current chart of accounts and make copies for everybody easily,
Yeah.
right? I
I
mean,
can print you an account code for every account, and the trial balance is all listed, the accounts are all on there.
yeah, so if you want that, we can distribute that early next week.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it just helps
It's a good
visually.
idea.
Yeah, it's a 5-minute deal, print that off.
Is there any way we could export it to be an Excel sheet? So that way we can,
No, yes, but
maybe later.
I'm thinking let's
Okay,
just get started with the thing that we know how to do easily.
okay, understood.
And then let Chip give us some instruction. So what I don't want to do is send Stacy and Robin off on some,
Yeah.
other direction that they end up having to get sidetracked on.
Yeah,
So-
understood. I didn't know if that was a function of printing or if you.
I don't
but I
know.
You're
wanna-
asking, you're asking the wrong guy.
Okay, I hear you, I can see.
I got 2 computer wizards downstairs, and I'm not one.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, we can see that we do that.
Yeah, on Monday if.
Please
I'm
feel
sure-
free to remind.
Yeah, I was like, I will
Just-
invite
yeah.
Bedford,
Just send a note, actually, to Jim and Stacy and Robin and copy me on it, and that would be great. So do you want me to just give a quick update on my meeting yesterday with the attorneys? So we met yesterday with Dave Rue and Bob. What's his last name, Jim? It's horrible. He's the person who has a lot of experience on municipal finance on SPNF staff. And he's done a lot of work recently with Rutland. He's supported their process with their TIF district application recently. So Dave really wanted Bob to be, Fletcher, thank you, Bob Fletcher. Dave really wanted Bob to be up to date on what's going on. So we spent just over an hour together yesterday, Jim and I and Bob and Dave. And basically we reviewed our situation using actual numbers from the audit, so that, and Bob was able to ask good questions that for the most part I think we were actually able to answer. And then basically we started kicking around kind of ideas, limitations in the charter, what can we do and what can't we do. And I think in the end, they went away with some more questions to ask, but I think the direction that we've begun to talk about is roughly in line with what they were saying, which is, first of all, that we can do if we choose, we can go to the voters with a bond to pay existing debt. That's not the right language. I have the language written down. And so divorced from all the other things, we could theoretically just go and get some kind of a loan instrument that would allow us to pay off the $1.8 million that we owe on the line of credit without any other justification. So that may be the easiest way to frame a potential special bond election, would be just to say we're going to focus on just that piece. Because there's a second piece that we could then do. Please, Jim, if you think I'm misstating this, speak up. But there's a second piece that we could do as soon as we have our year close and we've gotten the audit, which we can push hard on to get sooner rather than later this year. And if we could get the audit, then we would know what exactly the due to others line is at the end of this year. And we could then address that in a couple of different ways. We could take another loan, which in theory would have to be, if it's a short-term loan that we decide to recommend, then the council can approve it, anything a year or less. If it's a long-term loan, then the likelihood is we would need to warn that for some kind of a bond election in the fall. But there's another way that we could deal with it, which is that we could simply tinker with the rates, the water and sewer rates themselves, and effectively just require less line of credit, short-term line of credit next year than we did this last year, and then theoretically less the year after that and less the year after that, because each year the line of credit is actually addressing that accumulated deficit. I'm sorry, yeah, the change in the rates would effectively be dealing with that line of credit.
From Sumsic again?
Or anybody, like we could go anywhere really to find that help if we want.
Okay.
So I obviously have a less clear understanding of how that would work than I do the first one. But by the time we were done, we were saying, okay, there are really at least 3 tools that we could have in our tool bag here. One is a short-term decision from the voters to deal with the $1.8 million line of credit and get that paid off with a long-term. So we would pay that off, and then we would service debt over the next however many years as a result of that, right? The second is we could, once we know what the remaining due to others line is, if we wanted, we could either borrow against, to pay that down, or we could simply spend as carefully as possible and adjust rates and try and adjust it year after year with short-term line of credit debt. Or there was a third option. Sorry, my brain really is fried at the end of this week. But there was a third option that was not about debt. I'll think of it in a minute when I'm not trying to think of it. But
Probably using the sinking funds.
that's what it was. Thank you, Jim. That's exactly right. They were saying, like Chip said to us, in the short term, you can make the decision. We reviewed our theory that at least the funds that have been committed without being legally designated, committed by the council. So basically what we've been calling sinking funds, that those funds could be uncommitted by council and therefore act as our buffer for the short term, and we could pick up roughly $1 million or a little more that would be available to help us pay cash, our cash needs over the coming year. Right, so that was the third instrument that would be possible.
So
for us.
that's basically writing ourselves an IOU
That's right.
for whatever we take out of
That's
that,
right.
of that money. And we have how much do we have?
So right now, in the total of all of those other funds, both designated and committed, we're sitting at about 1.5 million. And just over 400,000 of that is Walmart money and a couple of small funds that were legally restricted as they were given. So that leaves us somewhere between 1 million and a million, 1,100,000 that could theoretically be available for that kind of a fund for us. So I think that's probably the direction we're headed, and this is where...
Using the sinking funds. So just because, looking at the gap, so we have 1.8 million due in June.
Yep,
We write ourselves an IOU, or however we want to describe it, with the sinking funds, just
Yep.
reallocate those. So we still have a delta, whatever, 700, 800,000. How are we covering that so that we can then renew a line of credit or other obligation of some kind? So how's the delta getting addressed?
that's the work.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I think that's exactly the right question, Hal. I think what we need from this group over the next 2 weeks is to dive deep into what do we actually owe, where do we think the money's coming from, how much is our assuming we borrow 1.8 to pay off that $1.8 million line of credit, what's the other part of the shortfall between now and the end of the year? Including paying off the $500,000 that we're supposed to put into the Causeway project, paying back the $300,000 to the construction loan that we have to pay back. If you take everything we have to do between now and the end of the year, how much more deficit or how much more shortfall do we have to cover? And what are our options to do that? And we could use some of that 1 million in sinking fund money for that. But, as Jim has pointed out repeatedly, on July 1st, if we just start at zero, we're very quickly going to begin spending
line of credit.
off a new line of credit, just because cash flow works that way, and we're not starting the year with $1.5 million to back us up. But this is exactly where I think we really need you all to actually go deep in the numbers and push with help from Jim's office on, okay, this is what's actually due. If 80% of our property tax comes in, this is the short, how much of our property tax came in last year? If we assume that percentage is going to come in this year, it's basically building more detail into the short term.
I may have an answer to that.
Great.
If anyone needs help, where we
Jim
are
puts on the tape.
Yeah.
today.
How many of those do you have, Jim? Should I make a couple more copies?
I've got,
Just enough.
I got enough for Ann and Pam to have one.
Great.
You both want one?
Laser printer is the world's most efficient chainsaw.
All right, Jim, so tell us what we're looking at.
Okay, the first page is from the tax administration. They tell the first 3 or 4 lines across it, how the total we can collect, all right? Second one down is the total we've collected already. And the third one down is what it's due to collect still.
Okay, I'm gonna
Okay,
ask,
so we've collected
clarifying.
about $2 million so far on this year.
Jim, I have to ask a clarifying
Yeah,
question, just so I'm clear. So I see payment, principal, interest, penalty, other credits, I'm assuming that's discount total. So when you're saying this is the total due, the 11,097,
Yeah,
assuming that's 11 million,
it is 11 million.
11 million change, is the amount based on mill rates and everything, that's the property taxes
That's
due.
based on the grand list, and
Okay,
how much we have to raise to get the rates, tax rates.
okay, so that's what we're bringing in, and then,
And that 11 million includes the school.
Mhm.
then the second, the 7,487, what's that again?
That's what's already been paid.
Yeah,
Paid to the city.
And
yeah,
that includes the first set of payments back in November,
right.
right? Plus whatever's come in so far this time.
Yeah, paid one is what we collected in November. Paid two is
Ah,
what was collected on this current one already.
okay.
Some of it may have been in November, some people pay ahead.
Mhm.
Okay, and you drop down to the 3622, okay? That number includes people that are late from payment one and what we've got left to collect on payment due on May 15th,
Okay.
okay?
So, and when you look at principal, interest, penalties, other credits, so the total is kind of our actuals versus is the principal up there projected, and then, I
Yeah,
mean, because there's a little bit of a, I mean, it's pretty insignificant, but just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly.
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, on the next page, there's a balance statement from Sunset as of last night, around 4 o'clock. I apologize for the penciled in figures, but I made an $87,000 deposit this morning. So technically, we've got a little over $1 million in the bank now. That's where we stand as a fund in the bank. And if you go to the last page, you take the 3,622,000, and I'm estimating we may have a couple $100,000 delinquent tax by this time this is all over.
Mhm.
If you take that down, we're down to 3,422,000. And if you add the 1,033,000 in, you got 4,456,000. Then you've got to take out 2,578,000 for the school. You see that 1.87.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking we're gonna have to spend, including all that, through the end of the year, it's gonna cost a little over 2 million, so we may wind up with a $200,000 deficit. And that's changed a little bit since I did this, when I gave you on, around the 1st of April. We're a month into it now,
And that's for the end of July.
the end of July. I mean, the end of
End of,
June.
end of June, that's the deficit for the end of June, okay.
Now again, except for the amount of tax we're collecting and that type of thing, and what's in the bank, all the other stuff is a guesstimate. You may spend more, you may spend less.
This is really helpful. So, Jim, that $2,088,000
Yeah,
that you project in spending between now and the end of the fiscal year
yeah.
does not include the $1.8 million line of
Does
credit.
not include 1.8.
And does it include the $300,000 that we owe to the construction loan?
Yeah, that CLOC is.
That's what that is, all right. And does it include the $500,000 that we're going to owe on the Causeway project?
No, it does not.
All right. So if you add that in,
Yeah,
we're looking at a deficit of probably around $750,000
yeah.
between now and the end of the year, in addition to the 1.8 million line of credit.
Now, that construction line of credit, I mean, that line of credit runs through October, so, I mean, theoretically, if we don't pay that back to the bank,
But isn't it true that we
June, we
can't
can't
borrow
borrow any
anymore
more on that
against
until you
it
pay it in.
until we pay that $300,000 down, right? And we can't pay our bills on the water tower if, in advance of the bond being executed, which is likely to be at least September. So if we have bills on the water tower, they've got to be paid out of the construction line of credit, I assume, or construction
Yeah.
loan.
And you can't get money to do
And we
that.
can't
until
get money
pay
to do that unless we pay back this $300,000. So in my mind, I'm considering that $300 and a few $1,000 a piece of what's got to be done in the next couple of weeks in order to keep us able to pay the bills as the water tower gets finished over the next couple of months.
That's why it's in that line.
Yeah. So if that's all true, and you take the $210,000 deficit that you project, which is so helpful to have in front of us, and you add you add two other things, 1.8 million and roughly 500,000,
2.5 million.
we're basically at $2.5 million that we've got to come up with between now and the 30th of June in order to make sure that everything gets done. And we know where we can get 1.8 million of that if the attorneys are correct and we can convince the voters to give us a bond approval. We can get 1.8 million of it there.
And you get another 1 million out of the sinking funds if you have to.
And we could pull from the sinking funds.
Wait a minute, I'm lost on the 1.8 million bond.
That would be, let's
Pay off the-
assume,
Would that be to pay off the line of credit only, and then we're sitting there with 700 and change, which you're talking about getting from the sinking fund,
correct.
giving us so there's still a little bit of wiggle room in there. I mean, a razor's edge of wiggle room.
Not a lot, right.
So,
And just to be clear, I suspect we will need a second financial instrument because even if we get the bond approved the last week of June, there will be a couple of month delay at least to be in the August bond pool, right? So that, I think probably what we would have to do is negotiate with Pasumsic or somebody and have the paperwork all ready to go, basically to borrow short term against the bond that we're going to do slightly longer term. And that's what will actually give us the 1.8 million in hand.
does it make, go ahead, Jim.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I thought the Sumsic wasn't reissuing a line of credit. Did we get a change from them?
We've got to pay off the current one.
I'm saying that Pasumsic, if they saw that we had approval on a bond for 1.8, and they see the rest of what we've done to stabilize our cash position, which I've already informed them about this week. I wrote to them yesterday to let them know about our actions on Wednesday night. So Ellen and Kate have already heard that from us. I think it's quite likely that they would consider a short-term loan against the bond that's been approved that will take a little longer to execute. And that's what we could then use to pay back the $1.8 million line of credit that's
Before
due.
the end of June. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So are we being a penny wise but a pound foolish to only do a 1.8 million bond?
This is a very good question.
And are we just potentially putting ourselves in a very tight position? Because when I think about like a short-term loan, probably have, I can't even guess what the interest rate would be on stuff like that. We should probably bake in a certain error factor into a loan like this of 10% or so. Just because wages, benefits, things of that nature, and because our accounting is not super tight, I think we should err, because even if we borrow too much, it just means we can pay it back quicker. You know, it's like we have to, you know, it's allocated. And I don't want to over-engineer anything, but I think any bond that we do should have a little bit extra runway on it.
So this is where you all may have to help me, but my understanding, because I'm really new to all of this, right? So I'm really not sure I understand this correctly, but my understanding is that we have to have like the legal rationale for what each bond that we request is doing. So what I heard the attorneys saying yesterday, and I actually think it'd be really helpful to have Bob Fletcher join us for a meeting so we could go back and forth on this with all of you and without me and Jim as go-betweens. And that might be something we want to do next week. And Bob's also available on the 19th of May for the council meeting, where I'm assuming we would have to make our recommendation, so he can be there to answer questions that night. We checked. But anyway, what I heard Bob saying yesterday is that there's legal language that justifies borrowing to pay off the $1.8 million line of credit. What I'm not sure is that without knowing the due to others, the actual deficit position, Bob was saying we really need to have that number through the end of the year before we can have the legal language to borrow in addition to that 1.8.
it might make the most sense to look at it from, just because to avoid potential future problems. The $1 million that we're talking about, or the 1.1 in
The sinking funds.
the sinking funds and other items, I think it might make more sense to write a bond for 2.8 million,
Not
Because-
touch those.
not touch those.
Yeah.
Because those are actually on projects, and I don't know what the Walmart money is. I mean, if you're new to
Actually, that's separate because we've taken that out.
we've taken it out. Whatever
Whatever's in each of those
whatever.
sinking funds.
Let's just say, look, for the community, it's like, look, we've got ourselves in this position. Here's the fact that we've got money set aside for these projects. We don't want to touch that and create more potential issues or things of that nature. However, that leaves us a cash shortfall of 2.8 million. Let's call it 3. I think it's probably, and therefore we're addressing a lot of concerns and not creating more potential concerns down the road. It's just a lot easier accounting. And I think a lot of people would be happy to say, we're doing this so we don't touch those funds and create accounting issues or potential accounting issues.
And that would give you actual projects if we're not, before it's just cushion cash, right? And that may be a problem. But if you don't touch the sinking funds, then there's actual projects, the causeway, et cetera, that you can allocate to. And it's earmarked. And then you can use the sinking funds as that cushion if you need it. And because I also think that going to the citizens twice and you get the first bond passed, they may wonder, well, or why are we doing this all over again? Didn't you think ahead?
Fatigue will be set in
Yeah,
immediately.
rather do one bond than multiple.
I think Bob's got a good idea, but you keep in mind that wages are gonna go up the 1st of July.
What's going up in July?
Well,
Wages.
yes, but the wage increases are built into the fiscal year budget, the new 25-26 budget.
But what about like your city manager? If that,
It's built in,
okay.
Okay.
starting 6 months into the year. So that means basically the city manager budget was salary at the current level, which is 95,000 plus benefits, is built in starting in January of 2026. And the office manager position that we have been talking about is built in from the beginning of the fiscal year at, I can't remember what, 55 or 60 grand.
I hate to be a negative on this movement towards more and more debt. And you know, sort of like the citizens sort of sucking it up. I mean, I see that we owe 1.8 million, and if you come to me and you ask me that for that bond, I can deal with it, possibly, or some citizens may say no, or more than 50% may say no. But you add on another 1.2 million or something, so that you don't have to go into some funds that have been there for a while. And I know what you've done with some of them. I mean, you borrow from, you put back, I mean, the more money that it seems is in the system, the more of it there is to, it's like water and sewage, you know? We had a picture of, well, maybe we're losing 40% of our water down the sewer. The more water you got, the more money you got, the more goes down literally down the sewer. I like having controls on this. And, you know, it seems to me, if you start from the beginning at what you mean by a line of credit, a city begins, it doesn't have a dime in its coffers. How's it going to pay the bill on day 1, on day 2, day 3? You take a line of credit that's going to cover this until the money comes in. And by the time you're done with that year, you got the $7 million that came in, you took a line of credit that would carry you through the first 6 months somehow or whatever, then the money's coming in. And by the time you're done, the $7 million all came in, and you could pay you could pay all your expenses, and the line of credit's gotten paid off too, and it's done. You're back down at zero. Now you want to have, I hear you, Hal, you want to have a little cushion. But what happens with the cushion is we get down to minus 1.8 million because everybody, has got this extra money and we can borrow from Peter, pay Paul. I'd like to see us just wind up 1 year. We started zero, we ended zero, we paid all our bills, we took in all our money, we paid whatever debt that was out there. That cushion's got to be small in my mind because whatever cushion you get.
I am perfectly on board with that. The one question I have is like the sinking funds that we have, and this is where we have to, to your point, we have to dig into the numbers. If they're already committed to things and we might be creating a bigger hole than we realize with the sinking funds. So understanding our actual balances and time commitments. The one reason I advocate for the idea of asking for more is it's available should we need it, but it's not the goal to use it. And I totally get what you're saying. If it's out there, people will use it.
And with the objects that we are going to need, the high ticket items that we're going to need, we project out for 2026 to 2027. You tell me that we are going to need an X and it's going to cost $1 million, then that's written into the budget for 26, 27 somehow, however we're going to manage to do it, and we're going to tax the citizens on it, and we see it that way legitimately. It's a terrible thing. We might even have to take a loan for that.
Almost certainly will have to take a loan for that.
Yeah.
Unless you get the taxpayers to pay that. It's let's
Yes,
say another
so
$500.
I hear what you're saying, but in fact, the numbers you're using are not right. The problem is that some of the things we're contemplating are $500 to $1,000 to $1 million. And you on a $5 million operating budget, or even if you add in the water and sewer and say it's a $7.8 million or $8 million budget total, I know they're not the same thing, but as a lump sum, right? Adding $1 million for some kind of a major item, in my judgment, would be simply unbearable.
Okay.
You'd have to service debt in order to manage to do so.
But we can see what we're buying.
I understand. I do understand.
It's not going down the sewer,
Yeah, as it were.
as it were.
And we have certainly seen a
We
lot
have
of
seen it.
things head straight down the sewer. So
Yeah, I hear the concerns. I'm not ready to commit in my own mind in any direction. I think we need more information.
Yeah.
For instance, I think that one of those sinking funds, Jim, is like $250,000 that's supposed to be spent on road paving. And that we do that in chunks at particular times, and we actually manage to put $250,000 aside to do that. And Hal's right. If we spend all of that $250,000 and don't pave any roads this year, we've got a combination of unsafe conditions, pissed off people, and by the way, deferred maintenance that's going to cost us as much or more when we actually have to deal with it later on. So I think we're going to have to look carefully at what each one of those sinking funds were designed to do.
we've done that with water meters for years.
I understand. I understand.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, it's a fluster clock.
Yes.
Let's just get for real. And
Totally.
and people, we do this in business economics, we do it in personal economics. Sometimes you have to borrow intentionally, spend mindfully, so that you can get back to an even basis. And it sounds like this has been, if it's taken us 4 years, Jim, was it 4 or 5 years since we've had a net positive cash balance? How long has it been?
No, at least that long.
So if it's taken us 4 or 5 years to get to this point, on the backside, we have to think it's going to take us 4 to 5 years plus to get our way out, because it's easier to spend your way into problems than to save your way out. So I think at the end of it, once we understand what's going on, it's going to be kind of a joint process of looking at it. And the fact of the matter is, it's going to be a 10-year payback to get to even keel, unless we decide wages and benefits, things of that nature. I mean, we're gonna have to look at everything then. And I think it's appropriate that we look at everything. It's like, okay, boom, wages and benefits, we have to look at holds on those or how we economize. Roads and sewers, instead of $250,000 a year, it's gonna be 200K. That's how we're gonna speed up, to your point, the zero-sum game. Because you're right, when the city was started and there was no money in the coffers, what they did was they asked all the citizens to come in and cut down trees and build the church. They asked them, go from there and to get their horses out and clear spaces for roads and rocks out of the way. We're having to do, that'll be our equivalent action. I mean, I just don't see us
The
doing it any other way.
The question I have is, so one of the questions that John Ward said to me at the end was, why are we asking for such a large increase in our rates? I said, John, because that's how much it's going to cost next year, just for next year.
To run the program.
To run the water and sewer. And he goes, really? I said, yes, John. This increase is not taking care of any debt. How did we get there? I said, John, that's a conversation for another day.
Right.
What we have to concentrate on right now is that the rates are simply to run water and sewer starting July 1st. And thankfully he got that. I think earlier he didn't fully understand, and so he would,
Yep.
But I guess my question is so we have to pay back the line of credit with Pasumsic in order to get another one.
Correct.
And we operate on a line of credit starting July 1 because we don't take in taxes until November.
Basically,
So we're operating in that way in arrears all the time. So I'm trying to wrap my brain around, we need the 1.8, is that right, to start the year, to pay off so that we can. And is any of that, and that's just the general fund. That's not water and sewer.
That's just a general fund.
Say that again.
That's the general fund.
General fund, okay. And so we need that one, and that's the bond that we're talking about. And I definitely understand what Hal's saying, because, I'm the kind that would rather take a little bit more money out to, even if it's just to pay back what I'm, while I'm still earning. That's, I can appreciate that. So I definitely think we've got to look, because, if there's $200,000 in there for a Vector truck, and we know that, Tom is already saying that we're going to need a new one, that's got to be figured in there somewhere over the next couple of years. And, the fire truck coming in November, and so I don't like having to go, whoever said it, it's going to be hard to go back to the voters more than once, I think, to ask for more money. So I think we have to roll all of this stuff. If we can do it, we need to make sure that
We can
We
take
know.
just enough, but we have to really calculate what just enough is.
Yeah.
So that we hit zero.
And I think
don't want to
we're-
miss.
That's
I
right.
think we're better held accountable to a one-time ask.
Yeah.
Yes, you're not going to get people in twice. We're going to be really lucky if more than a handful show up on Tuesday.
Yep.
So I've been out of it. What's going on Tuesday?
An election.
That's
We're
the
voting
election for the
And
council seat.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm like
No,
so
don't
jet lagged
apologize.
right now.
but
We're in this,
but
we're doing
your
this.
your
That's good
response,
enough.
Hal, is pretty much across the board. What election?
Right.
Oh, really?
So that 1.8, if we got to come up 1 just to pay the line of credit, that does not include any deficit the general fund may run on top of that.
Well, we see the 200K projected right there, so
That could be more, could be less.
there's more.
I think one thing that I am wanting to just say in this moment is, when we present this budget, we're headed towards asking the voters and addressing, most likely, right? Addressing this deficit with whatever plan the numbers demonstrate. The attorney support, the audit shows. And again, I think more than just, okay, this is gonna get us by with the next year when we come to the voters and, hey, this is just for the next 364 days. But we're also the fiscal practices group, and I think we're gonna need to have policies and also talk about how this is gonna go differently. It's not just, okay, we're gonna get the money and do what we've always been doing. And I think that that's part of our messaging too. I don't have the book in front of me on how we're gonna change it, but I think that's a big part of the conversation, so.
I think that's a,
The immediate thing is a line of credit.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to have that in order to get operate.
yes. And I think Carter actually really names kind of a tactical strategy that I think is really helpful, right? So we have, basically, we're going to be under the pressure for the next 3 weeks that the water and sewer team has been under for the last 3 weeks. Because the time crunch we've got is that if we're going to warn for a bond before the end of this fiscal year, a bond election before the end of the fiscal year, we've got to do it by May 19th at the council meeting on Monday night, May 19th. So we basically got 2.5 weeks to decide what the rationale is, which the attorneys will help us with, like the legal rationale. And our job is, what's the fiscal rationale for the number that we're going to present? And Carter is absolutely right that we should, either, it may be, Carter, as I'm thinking about this out loud, that we're talking about a kind of a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 at this point. Phase 1 was get Nemrick up and running and hire them to help us figure out our long-term counting practice, right? Phase 2 is what's the number and how do we recommend going after it? And by the way, how do we service whatever debt we encourage, right? Because we haven't talked about that yet. If we take a 1.8 or a 3 million, whatever the bond is next year, somewhere in that year, we're going to have to start paying that back. Yeah. Though my understanding is, like, if we end up in the August bond pool, I think there's one payment in the fall, and then the payments actually kick in starting in March or April. So the good news is we don't have to manage a full year's worth of payments if we take that bond, if we get that bond somewhere toward the end of the first quarter of the year.
Part of the equation will have to be the rates on the line of credit versus the rate on a bond. Can Pasumsic, and we're not citing out that far, can they quote us a rate that they'll hold to when we reopen a line of credit, so we know what's in our best financial interest, whether to go bond or?
I think they can give us a number that will be pretty close. They may not be able to commit themselves to it if it's going to happen 2 or 3 months from now.
And what about the bond bank?
So what I'm told is that the bond bank is currently offering it 4.5.
What's our current on the line of credit?
I think it's pretty comparable now.
Yeah, I think right now the line of credit is just under 5, isn't it, Jim? 5%.
And I don't,
4 something.
I don't know how much comes in and out of the bank on a monthly basis here for the city, but the million that's in there now, like how much on an average month do you draw out?
Well, just on wages and the benefits at the end of the month, you're about $340,000.
Okay.
Just in wages and the benefits alone.
Is
Then
there
you've got the rest of the operation.
Is there a better place that we can park some of the excess that we don't need for the month that's better than 1 1/3? That's,
It's a great question.
we just addressed this at UCA with Susie, works with, I forget the name of their agency, but I think their rates are actually significantly better than that with the
Community financial?
yes,
Yeah.
community financial. It might be good to keep what you need in there to clear payments and such, but move the rest into an area that would produce a little more.
But I think Rick's point is well taken. We haven't budgeted to pay a loan in next fiscal year.
That's right. Whatever we do, we're going to have to figure out, depends on how much it is. If we're talking about trying to figure out how to service $100,000, my guess is we can go through the budget and figure out where to tweak and make adjustments in one area in order to compensate for $100,000 you've got to add in another. If we're talking about $300,000 or $400,000, it's going to get a lot tougher. And I just don't know that number yet. And we were, I mean, you know, we were riding the department heads pretty hard on everything except staffing. I didn't try and press anybody about staffing, in part because we were trying to make fast decisions about the budget we wanted to present, and a lot of our staffing is already pre-configured due to union negotiation.
Except we added a mighty chunk to Parks and Rec that was unexpected, unbudgeted, and I'm not knocking what we got as a result of it, but that was a big chunk of change.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look now. But what I'm saying really is that I think there's tinkering that could be done in the budget depending on how much we have to service next year, especially if we're not trying to hit, you know, we don't have to make 12 payments. And my understanding actually is that bond bank payments happen once a year, not monthly. That's what I've been told, I think. But in any case, we gotta figure that out. So I'm trying to make a little list of the things that we need, this team needs, in order to go deeper on the numbers, in order to be able to get to where we want to get by the 19th of May. And I'm hearing we want a conversation about where the money could be parked short term if we're going to be sitting on $4 or $5 million for a month or two. That's a great question. I think Jim has given us the beginnings of the analysis we need to do that I think we need to go deeper on, where we actually come up with, start a spreadsheet that shows everything that's going to have to be spent and the timing on it.
We need to start looking at the budget and make sure that there's areas to get the debt servicing, because if there isn't, we need to factor that into the bond.
Mm-hmm.
It would be nice to know what the funds that are accessible to us are, how much is in them, and you know, what can be taken and what really we think we can't take.
From the sinking funds.
From the sinking funds. I mean, the sinking fund, as I pointed out in a different place, the sinking fund for the Vector truck, money was being put into the $160,000 that's in it, was being put into it to make the deficit in the water and the sewer budgets even bigger. In other words, you had no money to pay bills, and nonetheless, you know, $60,000, $80,000 went into those funds when you couldn't even pay your bills. And when I talk about what happens with the sewer, that's the kind of thing that can happen.
And whose decision is that to place that money there?
To place it in the sinking fund in the first place?
Yeah.
Well, if the system had been working the way it was supposed to be, the voters effectively made the decision when they passed a budget that included a capital expense for a particular item, and what should have happened was that item was set aside or earmarked in some way so that every year when you kept doing it, eventually you had the money you needed, right? But in fact, what happened was there's been enough staff turnover and inconsistency that in some moments, some of that money got funded, and in other moments it didn't. So there's no, you know, the Vector truck being the easy example. Like, we can point to the Vector fund and say, if you go back, you can see there should be $440,000 or $60,000 in that fund right now, and instead there's 160. So it's not that nothing happened, but it happened inconsistently.
But what was worse, because you can't fund a fund when you don't have any money to fund it with. And when you see that you're going negative in water and sewer, you can't fund the fund then.
Well, in effect, that's what happened, right? In effect, what took place was when they spent through all of the deficit, you know, when they experienced the deficit, spent through all of their cash reserve, there was no money left to try and actually fund those sinking funds, and they stopped doing it.
Yeah, but the 160 that went in was happening when
But I don't know when it went in. I don't know when it went in, and I don't know if it went in 6 years ago or last year.
Oh, we can.
We can figure it out, but I'm just saying, I don't know when it happened.
And blaming the voters
I'm not blaming the voters.
Well,
No, I'm not blaming the voters. I'm saying the voters approved.
of course they did, on the basis of absolutely no information.
Correct.
Which is also true for the council members who couldn't read the budget that was presented to them and were not even able to ask clarifying questions.
Which is why we're solving these problems. That's right. I'm not disagreeing with
Why
any
didn't
of
we
that.
get rid of the city center pillory and stocks? I mean, geez.
I'm willing to have that added to the budget.
Yeah.
Well, and on Hal's line there, I know it's a joke, but are there any accountability mechanisms for city employees that spend money past the deficit without authorization?
It would be great. I don't think that's, honestly, I don't want to go there.
I don't know if that's where
You might want
There should be.
moment, but I think that's part of like the phase 3 of how do we make sure this doesn't reoccur after.
That's a conversation I have energy for. So
Yeah.
what are the policies and practices we're going to put into place so that, to Ann's point, we don't end up back in the same position again
Right.
a year or 2 or 5, which is the scariest part down the road when
Exactly.
council has changed and who knows who the staff will be, and we've got to create the systems by which it remains a fully accountable process.
Yeah.
Some guardrails.
The guardrails.
Yeah, and they're not meant
That's
to be punitive unless you're spending money you shouldn't be spending, you know. It's meant to just keep people aligned with the budget.
Okay.
That might be a really good job for a city manager.
That's right.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's, when we get there, that's the
That's-
gatekeeper, in my
That's whose
opinion.
job it's going to be.
That's the gatekeeper.
Is that the budget book?
Yeah.
There's another one right here if you want it.
Oh,
Right there, this year.
Okay, groovy.
The bottom one is this year.
I don't think I have
it's
one.
this year's,
It's all yours.
the one we just voted on.
I got piles of them downstairs.
Is there another one?
The one that begins in July. Okay, great.
There's another one over there, I think.
I promise to try and stay awake and read this.
Good luck.
Well, and you know, and we've actually been able to read it. There were years we all sat in here going, what is this? And nobody could find anything. And at least, you know, I just opened this up and there's the Baxter Sinking Fund. $770,000, I think that's, I don't know whether that's water or sewer, but anyway, there's the,
Well, it's been removed.
No,
In
right,
the budget
it
that was
has
passed
been
on Wednesday night.
It's been
It was
removed.
removed.
right. Right.
And the budget that was
Because Ann's absolutely right. It makes no sense to put money aside when you can't pay your bills.
in the budget that was approved Wednesday night, did you email that this week? Did you get an email with that, but new budget?
It would be in the minutes packet, and I think it was in the agenda packet that was sent out, and I think you got a copy of it, but we can get it to you.
Okay.
And that's just the water and sewer budget.
That's only water and
This
sewer,
is comprehensive to adjustment, okay.
I-
But yeah, no, if that's appropriate to look at, we can silo it.
Yeah, I've been nose down elsewhere.
And the only problem with the budget is, I mean, is that so many things are combined, you know, it's just lump sums. How do you know that it's being spent efficiently? You know, that's, yeah, I wish there were better mechanisms so council knew a little bit more the minutia of what they were voting on.
Well, I think that's why the work that we've just contracted with Nemrick to do is so
Right.
important, right?
Right.
Because that's the value in streamlining the chart of accounts in the general ledger, and then making sure we're getting the kind of reports we want, and then educating ourselves as a council about how to read those reports, and talking about them, you know, at least once a month. I would say for the time being, every meeting, there ought to be every regular meeting, there ought to be a discussion about this.
Yeah, it needs to be front of mind.
Absolutely, and if we practice that for a little while, it'll become a well-developed muscle, you know.
Well, I think a regular board, city council meeting would be I think it's a good idea, is a actual versus projected. So that was a pretty standard part of our FP&A team's meetings in a different life.
I know you guys might not want to take on another task, but water and sewer, I have taken on the task of going through on a line-by-line basis the water and sewer budgets and seeing, if they make sense, if if too much is clumped, if, et cetera, et cetera. And I was hoping that at some time, whether or not it's phase 2.5 or phase 3.5, that you guys would consider looking at line by line the general fund budget and seeing whether or not things need to change there as well.
Well, whether or not the task force is empowered to do that, it will have to be done by somebody, be it council or, you're not.
Honestly, I think this group is empowered to do it. I just don't think it's phase 2, I think it's phase 3. Because this budget's already been passed.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're talking about the budgeting process for the new fiscal year 26-27, which if we were smart, we would be starting as soon as the new year hits this year. So by late summer, we should be creating a process to do that.
But just because it's budgeted, are you obligated to spend it?
No, of course not.
Okay, because.
No, we could certainly spend less, and typically we do spend less in some categories and more in others. A budget is nothing more than anybody's best guess at that moment, right? And then you do your level best to either stick with it or understand the implications when you don't stick with it for some reason that you can't predict. So I do think that by, probably August, we should be advising the council on the process by which everybody's going to be a part of creating the budget for the following year, so that by late fall, early winter, we've got mostly what we need in front of us for numbers to look at. And I'd be pleased for this group to do a line-by-line review and ask for justification of every line.
Might not even hurt to have keep a running document of liabilities that the council's votes have incurred over the year. Keep it in front of them so they know this is where we're out of budget so far, or cuts if they find savings, but because every vote counts.
I love that idea.
I have to go.
So can we just talk about next meetings before you disappear, Lori?
Yes.
And what's going to happen between now and there? Because if we sit down and have this same conversation a week from now, it's too late.
Right.
So what's the homework we need to do this week? I've got a list of the things I think you all are going to need that I can work with the treasurer's office and Carter to try and create next week.
The main thing is to make progress on nailing down what we need to borrow, basically, and so we can determine how we want to borrow it, getting clarity there.
Yes, so trying to come up with something like this that really spells out every expense on a very detailed spreadsheet that we're going to incur, and matches it with what I think are really helpful numbers from Jim about what's left to take in. Right? So who's got any time or energy to work on that over the coming week?
Something here. Depending on how quickly we get some stuff, I can spend some time Tuesday and Wednesday nights working on this.
Okay, so that means Jim, you and I would work on Monday.
Actually, I could do Wednesday, I could work on it Wednesday and Thursday to give you more
Great,
time.
then we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to try and come up with the beginnings of that spreadsheet for how to work from. It's basically what you've already started, and just trying to get as detailed as we possibly can on it.
Yeah, and I may have some questions when I'll go through.
I've got an election going on Tuesday, so that's.
Yeah, don't forget that.
For all 35 people who come in to vote.
Yeah.
Don't forget the pillory. I like that idea.
I'm really sorry you said that out loud. Okay, and we're going to meet again next Friday at the same time?
And next Friday I won't have to leave, so.
Great.
If it needs to be, the other thing is that just to say, I'm busy every night of the week, but I can, adjust whatever. if we need to have a working session on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon or whatever, it is what it is. It's just during the day, I don't think that my boss would be appreciative of how took off time. Hello.
Okay, so we'll get you that stuff by
I'll
Wednesday.
start working on a few things, and it'll be really basic, I think.
Mhm.
And I'm totally open to feedback on what it looks like, because I'm sure I will go in with one approach and it'll come out something totally different.
What will you be working in Excel?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I gotta look and see, because unfortunately my new company does everything on Google.
Well, see, everything we have is Google, so I wasn't gonna make you go that way. I know Excel's a little more robust.
Oh,
Yeah.
I may have
I kind
difficulty.
of have to re-educate myself every time I look at a spreadsheet if I have to go to Google, so yeah, well, I'll do it on Google, which you can translate. I think it usually translates pretty easily into Excel.
Here's one other opportunity. The person I mentioned to you last week who works with the Department of Environmental Conservation with the state, who said there might be some other vehicles available to us to help us with cash flow, like low or no cost loans, has set a meeting with himself and another of his coworkers for Monday, the 12th at 2:30. And I would welcome anybody who wants to join me in that call.
Can you send out invitations?
Mhm.
I think I might be able to.
Can't, I will send it and y'all would be welcome.
2:30?
2:30 on Monday, the 12th.
That's possible.
Okay.
Might be able to attend virtually, but I can't. Okay.
I'll be virtual too,
Yeah.
actually. I'll be
Yeah.
away that week, but, okay.
I'll only be there for like 30 minutes, and I got meetings scheduled for that time frame.
I think if we had one or two people with me, I'd love to, and why don't we also say, should we invite to see if Bob Fletcher could join us next Friday for the meeting at 4?
I had that in my,
You got that, Carter?
yeah, I put that in my notes.
Excellent, all right.
Rather than-
Maybe you and I could follow up, Carter, on Monday and just make sure that we're on top of all this stuff together.
Yeah, I think the things that I had were talking about, as we go through the budget, the cash flow issues of where are the sinking funds and what's attributable to them. When we talk about the debt, how is bond debt serviced? So understanding what the payment terms are, things of that nature, what kind of rate, 4.5% sounds like. Budget, which I'll go through and start going through and looking at the revised budget.
Is somebody able to get the bond servicing to Hal? I don't know who's talking to the bond bank.
That reminds me that I think what we were talking about yesterday with the attorneys was that it was time for us to go back and have a conversation at the bond bank itself and let them know where we're headed. Because the other thing we have to keep in mind is that, I think it's May 19th actually, is the deadline for the August pool of the bond bank. And I've been told that it should be enough for us to say, we expect to come with a request for $2 million. Can you hold that much of the bond pool for Newport? But we need to have that too. So I will also.
Like a letter of intent.
Say again?
A letter of intent of some kind?
Something like that, yeah. So, and I think probably between Carter and I, we need to set up a meeting with, go back to the bond bank and say, here's where we stand a month later. Let's talk about what we need to do on your end in order to make this all work. So.
Will I accept it before there's a vote?
I'm saying, I've been told that they will informally say, we're aware that Newport is likely to need this kind of money.
Earmark it.
In kind of semi-earmark it. Yeah, I don't think it's a commitment, but it's an awareness maybe.
Because we're gonna have to move so fast when we finally make a decision.
Yeah, I can send out those invites or inquiries to meet, just to recap, with Chip to meet next week, Bob Fletcher, to see if he can walk through what he knows and some strategies or whatnot, and then the bond bank, and then, oh, I had another thought.
The Department of Water Conservation meeting?
And them, yes. Oh wait, did you say, I thought that was already on, or did you?
It's
oh,
on my calendar already.
Okay, so I'll just
So
bother you
all we're
to
doing is
invite.
making sure everybody
Okay.
here gets an invite for that.
And then,
I think you and I need 20 minutes together at some point to just kind of go over this.
okay,
There's a lot here that I think between us we probably caught, but I'm not sure either one of us caught it all individually.
fair. And then is it more of a phase 3 thing to meet with water and sewer and collaborate on?
Yeah, I'd say let's get through the 19th,
Yes.
right? And then we hold a joint meeting.
Yeah, understood.
If the line of credit rate is the same. as
Sorry, I had to.
So that raises one last question on my mind, which is, for water and sewer, we held a public forum in advance of the city council consideration of a
Yeah,
change.
yeah.
Should we plan for some kind of
Sewer
a
rates being high.
similar public forum in advance of the May 19th meeting? Or do we just do the May 19th meeting and then hold a public forum to let folks know
But if we do it at.
kind of what we're headed for now? You know, the public meeting itself on the 19th will certainly give people an opportunity to speak
And give us feedback
and give us feedback as
Yeah.
so maybe we don't need to worry about getting a public forum in before the 19th, we could do it
Hey
after.
guys, the camera's picking up.
Oh, all right.
I support an after, because then at least there will have been council either agreements or tabling, I don't know, that's, I think, an important piece to like fold into that presentation and public forum. And then also it's closer to the vote, which might inform more, you know. Also hopefully stir
So
up some
what we were
interest,
saying,
like honestly.
Travis and Jim, is we were debating whether we need a public forum in advance of the meeting on the 19th to help folks in the community understand what's going on, or maybe we do it after. So we would just hold the regular council meeting on the 19th, and this would be the primary focus of it. And then we would sometime shortly thereafter hold a public forum in which we answer people's questions about whatever we've decided about a public bond and that kind of stuff. Which I think makes more sense at this point. The timeline is so
I think it's better to
tight.
do it after 19th, so they'll perform and hear what people thinking, or they can hear what you guys are thinking. Then that influence the decision whether to vote yes or yea or nay.
Right. That's right.
What's the turnout on a special election typically?
I don't know, Jim.
I had a special election for 35 people turned out, so I'm hoping we get at least a couple hundred, I think. That may be a wish beyond.
It depends. Some special elections have had good attendance, others, some reason, not.
And there's
Yeah,
no,
well, and it all depends, I mean, yeah, all depends what the reason we're voting for is.
Mhm.
and there's no requirement for a certain quorum, if you will, for the vote. If 20 people show up, that's, and they vote yea or nay, that's the direction you go. You don't have to have, 50% turnout to, okay.
Is there any minimum amount of voters you need to have? I mean, can you do it with 3 to 2?
There is for an election. Well, it may be in this case, so we are voting of an election. I think it maybe it's at least 30, maybe.
Could you check that, please?
I'll check.
Because if that's problematic, we may need to.
Because in a normal election, they have to have at least 30 or 1% of the checklist, which earns less,
Okay,
and 30 is less. I suspect that applies to this, but I'll check.
okay.
Fun.
All right,
Devil's in the details.
are we done?
I reckon so. Did I bite off enough? Don't you know anymore?
Yeah, I think if you and I could just set some time, maybe on Monday or something, to get this together. This feels good. I was feeling a little out of control, like I didn't even know how to sort through all the things we need, but I think we've got the right lists now.
I do want to pick your brain on what you want to see out of this, because that's the number one in producing a spreadsheet. I could go Hail Mary. I'd like to make sure I'm on par with, on step with what you're.
You know, I trust your judgment, Hal. I mean, what we're really, in my mind, what matters the most is to make sure that we have a strategy that will keep us solvent from now through the 30th of June. So we need enough detail to know, both on the income and the expense side, what's going to get impacted here.
I will say, I was leaning more heavily toward a larger bond. But now, in considering, I mean, we need to figure out what the debt servicing is gonna be. But with the line of credit, we don't, I mean, it can sit there. Number one, we don't have to take the full line of credit, right? So we're not paying, if we do the bond, we're paying interest on that money from day one. With the line of credit, it's a little more forgiving. And we don't necessarily have to make payments until the day it's due. So it's a little more forgiving in the debt servicing. What I was fearful of was, I thought there was some hesitancy from our earlier meetings of Pasumsic to extend us a new line of credit. And if that was a problem, then the bond was definitely a better solution.
That's a great point. I mean, what I understood, Travis, from my first couple of meetings with them was there was no way that they could imagine saying, oh yeah, I'll just take a new line of credit for $2.8 million, pay off the old one for 1.8 that you owe, and we'll just keep on going. They were like, we're not doing this again.
Right.
So
We're not doing that.
we need to see that there's a strategy
Yeah.
for how, one, you're gonna deal with the deficit spending, and two, you're gonna deal with the deficit, right?
Yeah.
And if we see those two things, I think they want to be helpful. And the city is nowhere near the cap on what we are legally allowed to borrow.
Yeah.
We've got plenty of assets to borrow against, so, the most important question is none of that. It's how are we going to bear whatever debt we take on in terms of the debt service,
Right.
right? That's what matters.
But that's more in line with what Ann was saying. And
Yeah,
if they're willing, then it seems like a good idea.
yeah.
Well,
Okay.
And I have the same proviso with respect to the line of credit. I mean, sure, we could go up to 4 million, but does that mean that we're gonna start thinking, oh, well, we've got 4 million, let's just,
But that's
No,
what
because I only
policies come into
draw,
place.
I only draw on that what we need.
I know, but needs can expand to.
They can, though in the short term, we have a lot of people paying a lot of attention. You are no longer the only one in the room who's raising these questions. I'm not saying that we can count on that always being the case going forward, or that we don't need guardrails, right? I think we do. But I'm not worried in the next year that the council's gonna go back to sleep on this. We've got a council that wants to make these things happen, so.
Right.
If I see something that we can't pay because we don't have the cash in the bank, then I go on the line of credit to pay that. And wait till the next time.
And in fact, part of what kind of brought me up short this time is that both Jim and I were thinking that the responsible thing to do last fall was to pay down the line of credit when we could, both to avoid the higher interest, and also I thought we were creating more borrowing power. We were, but in fact we were kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, because effectively we had borrowed 2.4 and it didn't matter that we paid it down.
Yeah, paying it down doesn't make any
We
difference.
still only had 400,000 left to borrow against the line of credit at that point. So, living
We
there.
already borrowed on a new one to pay off an old one the year prior to that.
Right.
That's why they want to do it again, Travis.
Sorry we didn't quite, I think good discussion, but it did not stick. And we're gonna adjourn at 4:20. No, not 4:25.
This time we're really
Doing
adjourning.
that math.